The wind swept across the open plains with a low, endless sigh, lifting dust from the earth and carrying it like a warning across. The Wild West, Eliza. Morgan walked alone along the wagon trail, her shadow stretching thin and crooked beside her as the sun burned high above. Each step felt heavier than the last, not only because of the miles behind her, but because of the truth pressing against her chest. She had been abandoned. The men who promised her safe passage west had taken her money, her last chance, and then left her, standing in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a small cloth bundle and fading hope. Her boots were cracked and splitting at the seams, the leather softened by sweat and wear. Every few steps, she felt sharp stones cut through the thin soles, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her moving. Stopping was dangerous. Stopping meant giving the land time to claim her, the way it claimed so many others whose names were never written down or remembered. The horizon looked the same in every direction. Endless grass, dry earth, and a sky so wide it made her feel smaller with every passing minute. She tried not to think about the past, but memories came anyway, riding the wind like ghosts. Her husband's face appeared in her mind, pale and still on the day she buried him back east. The farm they had tried to hold on to, the debts that piled higher than the fence posts, the whispers that the West was forgiving. That land was cheap, and opportunity waited for anyone brave enough to take it. She had believed them because believing was easier than staying behind to starve. Her canteen was empty now, its dry weight banging uselessly against her side. Her lips were cracked, her tongue thick, her throat burning with every breath. By midday, the heat wrapped around her like a punishment. Sweat soaked her dress, then dried stiff against her skin. Flies circled lazily, sensing weakness. Eliza swatted at them half-heartedly, her arms trembling from exhaustion. She told herself to keep walking until sunset. After that, she would find shelter, anything. A ditch, a stand of rocks. Somewhere the wind couldn't reach her bones when the cold came. But deep down she knew the truth. Without water, night would finish what the day had started. Her knees buckled suddenly, the strength leaving her legs without warning. She stumbled, catching herself just before she hit the ground, breathing hard as her heart pounded in her ears. For a terrifying moment, her vision narrowed to darkness. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering to herself that she could not fall here. Not like this, not forgotten. When she opened her eyes again, something interrupted the endless line of the horizon. A fence. Old weathered posts leaned under their own age. Wire stretched loosely between them. Beyond it stood a barn and a small house, both worn but standing stubbornly against the land. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney. A ranch. Hope surged so suddenly it nearly hurt. Then fear followed just as fast. Ranchers were cautious people, hardened by loss and theft. A lone woman appearing out of the dust could mean trouble, or worse, rejection. Eliza slowed as she approached the gate, her steps unsure now, her pride fighting with desperation. She rested her hand on the rough wood of the fence post, splinters biting into her palm. The pain grounded her. She straightened her shoulders even as her body trembled. If this was to be the end, she would not beg. She would ask once. That was all she had left. The sound of boots crunching on dirt made her turn. A man stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his movements steady and unhurried. A hat shaded his face, but his eyes were sharp, watching her carefully as he closed the distance between them. Eliza swallowed hard. "I don't mean any harm," she said, forcing the words out despite the dryness in her throat. "I was left on the trail. I just need water. I won't stay." The man stopped a few steps away, his gaze moving over her worn dress, her shaking hands, the empty canteen. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't speak right away either. The silence stretched, heavy and uncertain, broken only by the wind rattling the fence wire. She felt suddenly exposed, as though the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for his decision. "You won't make it far without help," he said finally, his voice low and calm. There was no accusation in it, only fact. "Come inside." Relief hit her so hard her knees nearly gave way again. She followed him through the yard, past the barn and toward the house, her legs barely obeying her. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of wood smoke and coffee. He handed her a tin cup filled with water, and she drank slowly at first, afraid of wasting a single drop. Then hunger and thirst overwhelmed caution, and she drank until her hands stopped shaking. He set a bowl of stew on the table, simple, thick, and steaming. Eliza stared at it for a moment, then ate, tears slipping down her cheeks without her permission. She tried to hide them, embarrassed by her own weakness, but the man said nothing, giving her the dignity of silence. When she finished, she sat back, exhausted but alive, more alive than she had felt in weeks. "My name's Thomas Reed," he said quietly. "You can rest here tonight. Tomorrow we'll see what comes next." Eliza nodded, unable to trust her voice. Outside, the wind continued its endless journey across the plains. But for the first time since she had been abandoned, it no longer sounded like a death sentence. One simple act of kindness had placed a wall between her and the darkness. And in the Wild West, that was sometimes the difference between living and disappearing forever. Morning arrived quietly, the pale light of dawn slipping through, the small window and resting on Eliza's face like a gentle promise. For a few heartbeats after she opened her eyes, she did not remember where she was. The fear that had lived inside her for so long did not rush in all at once. Instead, there was only warmth, the faint smell of coffee, and the distant sound of movement outside. When memory returned, it came softly. She was alive. She was safe. She had not been turned away. She rose from the narrow bed slowly, her muscles stiff from days of walking and hunger, but there was a strength in her now that had been missing before. Outside, the ranch was waking up. The barn door creaked open, horses shifted and snorted, and chickens scratched at the dirt, completely unaware that a life had nearly ended just beyond these fences only a day earlier. Eliza stepped outside, the cool morning air filling her lungs. The land looked different in the early light. Harsh shadows softened, and the wide plains no longer felt empty, but open, full of possibility instead of threat. She wrapped her shawl around herself and watched Thomas move with quiet purpose, feeding the animals and checking the fences. He did not speak at first, as if he understood that mornings were for listening to the land, not filling the silence with unnecessary words. After breakfast, he finally looked at her and spoke. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his tone steady. "But if you want to stay a while, there's work here. Honest work. It won't be easy." Eliza met his gaze, her answer already clear. "I'm not afraid of work," she said. "I just don't want to be helpless again." Thomas nodded once, as if that was the only promise he needed. From that day on, Eliza became part of the ranch, not as a burden, but as a pair of hands willing to do whatever was needed. She cleaned the house, cooked meals from whatever supplies they had, mended torn clothes, and learned the rhythm of ranch life. The work was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose, not despair. Days turned into weeks, and with each sunrise, Eliza felt herself returning. Her hands grew stronger, her steps surer. The haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by something steadier. At night, they would sit on the porch as the sky filled with stars, the silence no longer heavy but companionable. Sometimes Thomas spoke of the ranch, of the droughts and the losses, of neighbors who had packed up and vanished without a trace. Other times, they simply listened to the wind and let the quiet say what words could not. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold and fire, Eliza found herself standing by the fence where she had first nearly collapsed. She rested her hands on the rough wood and looked out across the plains. The memory of that moment still lived inside her. The fear, the weakness, the certainty that she was about to disappear. Yet here she stood now, stronger, steadier, alive. Thomas joined her, leaning against the fence beside her. "You could have kept walking that day," he said after a while. "Most folks would have." She shook her head slowly. "I was done running," she replied. "I think I just needed someone to remind me that I still mattered." The wind passed between them, carrying the smell of earth and grass. Thomas looked out across the land, his expression thoughtful. "Out here," he said. "Kindness doesn't come cheap, but it lasts longer than anything else." Eliza understood then that the frontier was not just a place of hardship and loss. It was also a place where small choices carried enormous weight. One man's decision to open, his door instead of closing it, had changed her fate completely. She had arrived with nothing, and yet she had been given something far greater than shelter. She had been given a chance to belong again. As night settled over the ranch, the stars burned brighter than she had ever seen them. Eliza felt no fear of the darkness anymore. She knew that life would continue to test her, that the land would never be gentle, but she also knew she would not face it alone. In the vast, unforgiving Wild West, a single act of kindness had saved her life, and in doing so, had given both of them a future worth fighting for. If this story moved you and you enjoy powerful Wild West legends filled with hope, survival, and humanity, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, And turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable frontier story.